to court a lot, and we have to assert simply that there are certain standards of conduct in society. We will hold people to the law, but I would hope that leaders in America.
Having dinner, y'all. Having dinner. I'm putting my camera. It's kind of cold still.
Actually can be held to even a slightly higher standard than just not committing crimes against people, but actually trying to use the government as an instrument for good, for everybody. That's what we have to try to get back to.
What gives you hope in this moment that the people are responding to this regime?
Well, when I was growing up, my dad used to say to us, when everything looks hopeless, you are the hope. So I grew up with that sense of guilt, Anthony. But I am finding millions and millions of people out there who regard themselves as the hope, and they understand that they've got intellectual resources, social,
really
cultural, financial, emotional resources that other people maybe don't have, and they can help other people who are in an even more desperate situation, as a lot of immigrants are now, and some of the college students are now, a lot of the federal workers whose jobs and livelihoods are on the line, and all the people that those federal workers serve. But I look to hope, to the past, because prior generations of American Democratic patriots have stood up against the Alien and Sedition Acts, like at the end of the 18th century. They stood up against slave masters and slavery and the violence of the Confederacy, and they stood up for civil rights against Jim Crow and racist sheriffs, and stood up for women's rights. And the founders of the law school where I used to teach, American University's Washington College of Law, they chained themselves to the White House. Emma Gillette and Ellen Spencer Mussey fighting for the 19th Amendment. And so, we are a product, we are the heirs to these civilizing movements that have transformed America. Obviously, from what we're seeing today, we're not an exceptional country because we're somehow immune to fascism or racism or authoritarianism. We're an exceptional country because we have sufficient democratic space and will to always defeat the fascists and defeat the racists and the Jim Crow bosses and so on. And so that's the process that is continuing today. And I'm deriving a lot of hope from Indivisible and Move On and Do the Most Good and all of the great groups out there that are fighting every single day for our democracy and freedom. And finally, I'm getting hope from the young people. And my whole campaign has turned into a project for young people called Democracy Summer. And they come and they learn about these movements that have transformed American life, and then they understand what their role is today in fighting for everybody's right to vote, in statehood for people in Washington, in Puerto Rico. And they see the fact that democracy is always an unfinished project. It's not just a static collection of laws, it's a process in motion, and they're part of that process, and the young people are stepping up and fighting. But we know that there's a political war for the soul of young America, and so I'm proud that I'm going to be engaged in that process with a bunch of my colleagues, including Andy Kim over on the Senate side, this summer as we get more than 1,000 young people across the country working for democracy and freedom.
Thank you for that. because I think that's what we needed to hear. For now, Representative Jamie Raskin, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
The pleasure is all mine.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News, or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Time.
Wondering if you could use your FSA for that?
Hello, hello,
At
hello.
FSA Store, you don't have to worry.
Just
Shop
having
more than
dinner.
2,500 eligible products at FSA Store. From weight loss medication and eye care to everyday essentials like pain relief and skincare. You'll also find surprisingly eligible products, telehealth services, and more. Plus, we have tools to help you maximize your savings.
We shouldn't be asking when full-fledged authoritarianism is going to be coming to the United States. I mean, it is here right now. Just look at what the Trump regime has done over the past few weeks. The DOJ is investigating Act Blue. The FTC is investigating Media Matters. The DHS is targeting Harvard. The executive office is going after Democratic allied law firms. The U.S. attorney charging a Democratic lawmaker with the crime. FBI is arresting a liberal judge and threatening to arrest others. The real question is who's fighting back in this moment? And I do give a hat tip to Harvard, where other universities have capitulated, and we can criticize Harvard in other areas, but they are certainly fighting back when it comes to the Trump regime trying to shut them down and trying to gain access to student records and student files. And I think one of the Trump regime's requests was basically to have a full audit of all of the political views of the students and the faculty, among other things, and to prevent Harvard from implementing anything having to do with diversity. So by now you may know the headline that the Trump regime is stopping or is preventing Harvard from having international students. 27% of the Harvard student body is international students. The Trump regime says that all of them will now basically be deemed to be here unlawfully, and they will be deported immediately. And then the question then becomes deported where? We see the Trump regime's tactics both in terms of sending people to El Salvador, South Sudan. They've been having talks with Libya, back to their home countries, wherever. It's not a pleasant process.
No, I'm good now. Ooh, I'm getting full. Hello, hello, hello. Just going live to eat my little food, my dinner. Haven't been live in a long time, so just get a little watch time hours. I ain't doing nothing. Find me a movie to watch. Let's see what he's talking about first. Oh man, that was good. And some perch. Let me taste my perch. Yeah. Let's do it. See what Ben's talking about.
DOJ is investigating ActBlue. The FTC is investigating Media Matters. The DHS is targeting Harvard. The executive office is going after Democratic allied law firms. The U.S. attorney charging a Democratic lawmaker with the crime. FBI is arresting a liberal judge and threatening to arrest others. The real question is who's fighting back in this moment? And I do give a hat tip to Harvard, where other universities have capitulated, and we could criticize Harvard in other areas, but they are certainly fighting back when it comes to the Trump regime trying to shut them down and trying to gain access to student records and student files. And I think one of the Trump regime's requests was basically to have a full audit of all of the political views of the students and the faculty, among other things, and to prevent Harvard from implementing anything having to do with diversity. So by now you may know the headline that the Trump regime is stopping or is preventing Harvard from having international students. 27% of the Harvard student body is international students. The Trump regime says that all of them will now basically be deemed to be here unlawfully, and they will be deported immediately. And then the question then becomes deported where? We see the Trump regime's tactics both in terms of sending people to El Salvador, South Sudan. They've been having talks with Libya, back to their home countries, wherever. It's not a pleasant process to say the least, and in some cases it's outright torturous. Harvard has responded with a powerful letter to its international students, as well as immediately filed a lawsuit. The letter to the Harvard community is as follows. Yesterday, the federal government announced that it has revoked Harvard's certification under the Student and Exchange Visitor Program and stripped the university of its authority to sponsor F&J visas for international students and scholars for the 2025-2026 academic year. The revocation continues a series of government actions to retaliate against Harvard for our refusal to surrender our academic independence and submit to the federal government's illegal assertion of control over our curriculum, our faculty, and our student body. We condemn this unlawful and unwarranted action. It imperils the future of thousands of students and scholars across Harvard and serves as a warning to countless others at colleges and universities throughout the country who have come to America to pursue their education and fulfill their dreams. We have just filed a complaint and a motion for a temporary restraining order. And then it says the Harvard International Office will continue to provide updates for those international students and scholars affected by yesterday's actions. You need to know you are vital members of our community. You are classmates and friends, our colleagues and mentors, our partners in the work of this great institution. Thanks to you, we know more and understand more, in our country and our world are more enlightened. Most to ensure that Harvard remains open to the world. And then in their lawsuit that was filed, Harvard has sued the Trump regime, saying it has made 7,000 foreign students pawns in an unconstitutional bid to bludgeon the university over its First Amendment protected viewpoints. Kyle Cheney was one of the first to post that lawsuit. The thing to note also is that the Trump regime is not alleging that Harvard actually violated any specific law. There's no you violated this, you engaged in this conduct. Also, we should note that I think there was a stat that it was 40% of a lot of the startups that have gotten over $1 billion in the United States have CEOs who came from foreign countries and who studied at places like Harvard. Let's bring in David Weigel, reporter at Semaphore. You've been covering a lot of the creep to authoritarianism and in my view, the authoritarianism that's here. I mean, you can speak to the scapegoating of immigrants. Your newsletter's been focused on that a lot recently, how the Trump regime's going to be trying to sell the fact that it's taking so many Americans off of Medicaid by targeting immigrants. And we see this angle here with Harvard as well. It's attacking the international students to then kind of implement the overall authoritarian agenda. The immigrants, the migrants are the pawns in this broader authoritarian scheme. Dave, you've been covering this for a long time, alum of Washington Post before coming to Semaphore, where you're leading their political coverage. Talk to us about this.
Certainly. I read the complaint from Harvard's attorneys, which include Robert Hur, who you might remember from last season, and it's pretty convincing. I don't think your listeners need to be convinced by this, but they point out the administration has been spamming them basically with requests, demanding information, has made asks that it can't answer. For example, any protest activity on campus in the last 5 years. And not just protest activity includes lots of things. With video, not just of something that went out of hand or somebody was scuffling, et cetera, et cetera. Any protest. So they point out this violates the First Amendment, this violates, or they argue, I should say, but it's convincing, First Amendment, Due Process Clause, Administrative Procedure Act. And if you're, again, probably not one of your listeners, if you're out there saying, haha, I love seeing the government sticking to these guys, and they ask for all their legal fees to be paid as part of the settlement. So taxpayers may end up paying Harvard legal team. I'm not sure if it's a great blow against the elites. But backing up, what is the political strategy here? Everything does run through America First nationalism and portraying their opponents from the Democratic Party to elite institutions as tools of the global elite who care about immigrants, not about you. It's Stephen Miller mindset.
Well, that was good.
Okay. Okay. Hey, y'all hanging out? Huh? Ain't doing nothing. Just had my dinner.
It's everything that they do. In this case, hypocritical is the wrong word. In this case, it does go back on something Trump hinted during the campaign, because he likes to say he keeps his promises. He delivers on his campaign promises. You might remember when he went
I
on
haven't
the
went
Oil
live in a
podcast,
long time, so
host in Silicon Valley who wanted him to win
just doing
and
a
wanted him
little.
to agree with him. He said, well, any
We're
talented
live.
immigrant student, we should staple a diploma staple a green card to their diploma when they get out. And the host said, that's great. And the campaign quickly said, actually, you didn't need that. And this is obviously the opposite of that. Implications are thousands of people who,
Hi
it's
guys.
fair to say that the definition of elite, we can all agree
I
on,
was
the elite
thinking it
of
was so
the world
good. I
who
had
come to this
some
who come to
codfish,
this
some
campus
perch,
are
some
now in flux. They're
catfish,
being told, go
some
apply for something
spaghetti,
else, which they
and some
can't do.
veggies.
Change your travel arrangements, which they
I
weren't
was really
budgeted
hungry.
for.
I'm fasting again, so
This is the opposite of attracting talent because, again, privilege,
got
the
my
conservative argument here. You don't like the idea,
alkaline
you think
water.
that they're cruel to about Israel, you don't like that they're woke, you don't like DEI, whatever.
Listen to the news.
The kind of students that are being attracted by this are the ones doing high-level
How
research.
long I've been
There
on
are
here?
some students who are undergrads and
Just
maybe
quick pop up.
they're coming from around the world, their parents are rich, whatever. There are also people coming to do high-level
Get
research.
back in the
Exactly the
algorithm.
people whose grants are being
Get
canceled
some
right
watch
now.
time
There's
out.
this impact that's going
Well,
to happen
one
on the
at least.
research capacity that we just taken for granted for 70 years. 70 years how long this foreign student program's been
Where's
going
my
on.
pick?
And it's being blown up because politically it's very safe, the Republicans think, to say the other side cares about immigrants and we care about you. Vance is even, I want to put words in his mouth, but the Vance side of the party, the Miller side of the party, very uncomfortable saying, let's take these spaces away and give them to Americans, without any concern for are they going to have the same skills, the same talents? Are we going to benefit because they stay in the country? Because part of the idea here is let's pull talented immigrants into the country and keep them here and make sure if they found a company, they do it in America. This is what some Republicans, including Trump, said they wanted last year. They contrasted,
Something wrong with
let's
those
say,
people.
asylum seekers who don't have super marketable skills or
Something
research
is really
abilities
fucking wrong
crossing the
with
border
this
getting
place.
asylum. They said, well, we don't want
These
those
people.
people. Maybe we want the talented people coming to elite universities. And now they're saying, no, we don't anyone in these schools care more about immigrants than they care about you. So it's politically consistent, but it is used the word authoritarian. That's a fine word to use. If we were watching Canada do this or watching France do this right now and say we're not letting any Americans into the school for political reasons, we probably would use that word. So I don't know why the word would be anathema to something happening here.
You know, sometimes saying it in ways like that, I've never said it the way you just said it, but you're right. If we were to see Canada, France, the United Kingdom, you name the country, doing the things and say, you know, French President Emmanuel Macron did X, Y, Z, I could guarantee you that we would be saying France is an authoritarian state, and yet the language here is still outside of a few others, not really capturing, I think, what you just said very directly. But, it doesn't seem to follow a pattern right here, which is, I think this is inextricably intertwined with what happened with this budget bill, which is going to be very harmful for Trump's base. I mean, it's literally the large redistribution of wealth, and it's going to impact red states, and particularly Trump voters who have higher amounts of percentage-wise of people on Medicaid, states that are taker states versus donor states that rely on the federal government more people on SNAP, more people that rely on the Department of Education. So the pattern is, you do a move like this, you kind of screw over your base, you pickpocket them, you then do the smoke screen. You do something that's unconstitutional, but you attack foreigners and you just shove it, in the American people's face. I think literally the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, did a post yesterday. Suck it. Like she literally wrote, "Suck it." Like suck it, and then Donald Trump goes and golfs, and then he goes and golfs for the weekend, does a meme coin thing. See you later. So to me. And as you, as a writer who covers this, like, does it now kind of follow, the pattern? Is this going to be the week where he does more tariff threats, and then the market's going to go down, and then he's going to have to be like, okay, I'm going to have to make a deal now, which isn't really a deal; it's just fixing the mess. It just feels okay. Here we go again. It's this storyline.
Yes, and I'd say my first principle covering this administration is never be surprised or never say this is unprecedented, even if it's unprecedented, because what's the point? This administration was very clear, I should say the Trump campaign was very clear about what it would do if it became another administration. Heritage Foundation, Claremont Institute, there was a lot of good reporting on what conservatives wanted from a future Republican administration and how it would use the levers of power. So I start by not being surprised by things and say, okay, well, how would this work? And the only downside there is sometimes a reader thinks that you're being a little too glib about it, which kills you. Yeah, you should be clear about the implications of this. But they've been, throughout these 140 days or so, ready to use executive power that they will probably get reversed. The best case scenario for them is they get a good judgment at the Supreme Court, or at least the Supreme Court upholding a Fifth Circuit ruling, which happened this week with the ability to suspend independent agency heads. We're going to, hey everybody, we're throwing out a 90-year-old precedent in a memo because we think we can. They win some of these, but generally they have the DOJ, they have you and me and everyone paying taxes, they have the power of the federal government, with all of the guns of the security state behind it, endless resources. Okay. Self-justification for this, for a lot of conservatives, is, well, when Democrats had this, they did this to us. They'll say, this is vengeance. Now, if they say this out loud, it shows up in a legal brief and it hurts them. But this is vengeance for what Letitia James did to Donald Trump. This is vengeance for what
Thanks for the live.
Hello. Donald Trump.
How y'all doing?
This is vengeance for the DOJ investigating pro-life groups. They did that to us, so we're going to do it to them. It's tit for tat. But they're very blatant about that. I don't want to repeat myself too much.
Memorial Day.
When there were investigations led by the Main Justice or U.S. attorneys that Republicans didn't like, Democrats and attorneys did not say, we're doing this to screw you over. You don't say that out loud. They're very blatant about this. Ed Martin, who was moved from D.C. U.S. attorney to Main Justice, to now he's the pardon attorney and a couple other titles, at this press conference when he was being pulled out of the U.S. Attorney's office because he couldn't be confirmed, and said, well, I'm not going, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, and pull the video up, that we're going to try to make cases, but we can at least draw attention to cases that maybe we can't bring, but we think there's been wrongdoing. You're not supposed to do that, because that has been basically the basis of law in England, America, our legal tradition. You can't just have the government out there saying, hey, we're going to damage your reputation. You end up having to pay a settlement for that, at least. If you're using the tools of the state to just damage somebody's reputation when you can't bring a case. But this administration, you mentioned Kristi Noem, I'm not saying every administration doesn't know what habeas corpus is. I know that she doesn't because she got asked about it and couldn't define it. And they're being very blasé with these powers in a way that's pretty risky. They might get reversed. Is there going to be political backlash? That's actually the least certain part of this. Is there a legal backlash? Yes, because the judges, and read the transcripts, show one of the hearings, judges are furious at how slapdash and stuff it is. Is it popular? Well, that gets you to where their political thinking is. Yes, there are things you can do that are illegal. And Martin's kind of crusade against Schumer went nowhere. Republicans loved it. The base loved it. You can go on Newsmax and defend it. They think it's amazing. And if they're maintaining their base and trying to demolish the left, yes, they can get very far with that. Because the other part of this, and I don't want to talk too much about it, is you can win. If the DOJ brings a terrible case against you, you can get it dismissed. You, in the meantime, maybe have to spend money on attorneys. Maybe you're lucky and you're pro bono or you're an attorney and defend yourself. But that's hours, months, years of your life defending this. And even if you get restitution, your life can be badly affected by the federal government's power to prosecute you. Republicans say we're doing this because, and I'm speaking universally about Republicans, but it's not hard to find a Trump person or a House Republican saying this. Well, they did this to the J-Sensors, and it's a very tit-for-tat style of politics that they are pursuing. Again, if we saw it elsewhere, I think we'd be able to identify what it is. Separate this from the policy that they're trying to implement. Just the legal strategy here on things that probably will be reversed is really radical, and I think that's getting all the attention it deserves.
You know, look, it sounds very Trumpy, right? When he would not be in office, what would he do? File the lawsuit, get the headline, pump the headline, either quietly resolve the case or dismiss it and hope that nobody actually talks about, that, and you get the headline, you push it over, you push, but like I think it's important that we continue to cover these things, and as you said, read the day newsletter, and you've got the newsletter on Semaphore,
sure.
And the most recent article that came out this week from the newsletter, Republicans preparing to cut Medicaid for U.S. citizens would prefer to talk about immigrants. So tell everybody to check out your writing.
Bush Guy, cold and smooth smiles.
Ooh. Man, these folks are really, really crazy. Really, really crazy. There's a lot of shit going on, y'all. Let's see what the...
Kremlin rifts and the war in Ukraine, hidden corners of power, internal crisis. The internal situation in Russia shows signs of rifts, particularly within the Kremlin. Former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is reportedly officially purged and faces the risk of political annihilation after numerous failures on the Ukrainian battlefield. This is seen as a sign that a silent power purge is underway at the center of power in Moscow. According to sources from Dialogue, Mr. Shoigu has not only completely disappeared from the media and public events, his family is also said to have been annihilated. Annihilating the family is a phrase often used to imply the removal of both political influence and power circles in Russia. Many pro-war bloggers from the Z community in Russia have begun spreading news about Shoigu's downfall.
What's up, people? Who up? Who up this late?
The more he speaks, the longer he's left to speak to people, to reporters, to whoever it is. He always ends up going crazy, right? There is going to come a point in every speech that Donald Trump does, every press conference that he does, where he completely stops making sense. You know, he likes to call it the weave. I do the weave. I weave in some things. No, what it really is, his brain just shuts down, right? It's that dementia part that starts coming into play, and he can no longer hide it. His body gets exhausted from all of the talking, and the dementia starts to take over. So, how do you handle that, right? I mean, you have to cover it up if you're the White House. I mean, that's what Republicans are telling us every day now. That's what Jay Tapper's new book tells us. The White House during the Biden years totally covered up the fact that this man's brain was turning to goo. So obviously that's a big deal, right? Well, apparently not. Because the Trump administration is doing the exact same thing right now before our very eyes. And most of the media doesn't even seem to care. Because here's what's happened. Over the last few days, the Trump administration has quietly been scrubbing every single transcript of Donald Trump's remarks from their official website. Now, for years and years, basically ever since the birth of the internet, the White House has kept transcripts of all of the remarks made by the President of the United States in official addresses, speaking with reporters, state dinners, things like that, media appearances. They keep the transcripts on the White House website. But now, 99.5% of them are gone. No, you can't go back and read what this crazy man said because, he looks crazy as hell. That's a cover-up, folks. Right now, I can't go to Mediaite's website without there being 3 or 4 different stories about Biden's mental decline right now. That's why I haven't been going to them recently, because who the hell cares? He's not the president anymore. Meanwhile, we have a real White House that's actually memory holing all of Donald Trump's craziest statements.
That's when
so
you
that we
read
forget
that
they
shit,
existed.
it sounds ridiculous.
That is a cover-up. So, while everybody's talking about, the press helped too, they helped cover up Biden's, mental decline, they're doing it right now with Donald Trump too, and y'all aren't talking about it. How is that not a thing? How is that not a problem? I'm not saying they didn't do it with Biden. They did. All I'm saying is that because he's not president anymore, and may not even make it to the end of the year, I don't care. Because it's not relevant. What is relevant, on the other hand, is what's happening today. A White House actively engaged in a cover-up to delete past statements of Donald Trump because they know that it exhibits mental health problems. They're deleting the symptoms from public view. And if you think what happened in Biden's White House is a big deal, then you have to think that of what Trump's White House is doing right now. Because this is bad. Biden's people didn't have to do it 120 days into his first term, I can tell you that. But Trump's people do. His mental decline is worse, it's clearly faster, and it's accelerating. He will be in far worse shape than Biden was when he left office. And I'll give you this, Biden couldn't, string a few sentences together by the time he left. He was in horrible shape. Trump will be there probably in a year or two, with 2 years left in his term. And the media is paying no attention to it because let's go pick on old man Biden.
Hello, little
Because
sis.
that's just what we do best. Thanks for watching today,
How you
everybody. And don't
doing,
forget, if you're
Lucy?
not...
I haven't went live in a while, so I'm just doing something like a silent live. Something like that. Something like a silent live. Welcome, welcome. I just want to get some watch hours. Watching America go to shit in a handbag. Basically, going to shit in a handbag. These people are crazy. What Lemon Drop got to say?
In the courtroom every single day. Is this? Have you seen anything like this ever inside the Diddy courtroom of the trial every single day?
I haven't. I think we actually all underestimated just how sensationalized it would be. I mean, this man has a larger than life personality. He's been on our TV screens for 30 years, but when we hear the details of his very public relationship with Cassie, we just feel like we're eavesdropping, like we're going into their bedroom with them. And some of the things that we've heard so far, Don, are so disturbing that I think it's what shocks all of us, that this man that we knew to be, like I said, larger than life, very boisterous, that he was doing all of this allegedly behind closed doors.
This is, you have your own independent
You don't know
Substack,
that man
and,
was afraid.
an organization that you work for is what?
Extra TV. So I'm a senior correspondent for Extra TV.
Yeah, okay. So listen, so then why do you think it is so different? As I hear all of these explicit details coming out, I'm like, oh my gosh, Diddy, why did you take that agreement? Why didn't you settle in some way to, take it? Because he would not, I don't believe he would have spent 15 years. I think he would have spent a much shorter time. It would have been tough. I think it's tougher on his reputation now. All of these illicit details coming out and then them playing that video over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I think he should have taken the plea. That's in my opinion.
I mean, so his defense attorney even said that his career is ruined, right? Because part of the government's claim is that he had control over Cassie's career. And that's part of the coercion that they're trying to show, and that he suppressed her career. But they're saying, and that he would also threaten to release these sex tapes to damage her reputation. But then his defense attorney was like, well, it was her lawsuit that showed the world what was going on behind closed doors and in their bedroom. And it was also her who destroyed essentially his reputation and his career. So they're admitting that there's no coming back from this. But I will say what they're saying is, yes, this man was violent. Yes, this man had mood swings. Yes, he had some sexual preferences that are not, conventional. But that's not what is at stake here. There's a racketeering charge. There's one count of racketeering, 2 counts of sex trafficking, another count of transportation for the intent of prostitution. And so what they're saying is, these are not federal charges. This may be a domestic violence charge. It may be even a sexual abuse charge, but these are state charges that I'm sure have passed the statute of limitations. So they're not saying that their client's an angel, but they're saying that the government is trying to go inside his bedroom and basically incriminate him for having sex that's not conventional.
Non-traditional sex or whatever. And look, people said you shouldn't be kink-shaming anybody for, but this is different because of the charges that are involved, right? The trafficking and all of that. How do you think the prosecution is doing in making their case, Mama?
I think they're building it slowly, very slowly, and they're actually now focusing a lot more on the racketeering charge. So in the beginning, because Cassie was 8.5 months pregnant, they had a deadline, right? They knew that she was going to give birth any day now, and so their star witness went third, which I thought was, I feel like it is what it is, right? They couldn't do much about it, but they also had an 8-week trial. So her testimony was very powerful, and the jury was intently listening. Still the jury has to remember it 8 weeks from now, right? When they're reaching a verdict. And so what I think they're doing this week was to build a racketeering charge to show that Diddy was a businessman, but he was also using his business and his network of employees to engage in criminal activity. So we heard from 2 Homeland Security officers who talked about just some of the things that they were finding in the raids, and then we talked to 2 former assistants that talked about how he was as a boss and the things that he made them do. One even got immunity because he didn't want to incriminate himself for example, buying Diddy drugs or turning a blind eye to some of the abuse that he witnessed. And so the racketeering charge is broad, and usually, we think about it as associated with gangs and the mafia, but they're saying that he, in a similar way, was a crime boss of Bad Boy Enterprise.
Crime boss.
A crime boss?
Yeah, that's essentially what they're saying. That he was the head of this organization, but he was using this organization and its employees to help cover up some of his criminal activities, to help him engage in some of his criminal activities. They even talked about, for example, one of the former assistants said that he had to drive Diddy to go confront Suge Knight, and there were guns involved, and he saw him grab some guns so that he could go confront Suge Knight at a diner. So that's kind of what they're building right now.
Gang bang.
Let me ask you, are you watching the jury?
I am.
Sitting there. Tell me about their reactions, because again, that's a lot of stuff. You know, you had the urination thing, you had the the nipple thing or whatever. What has been the reactions from the jurors?
Yeah, so the jury makeup is about 8 men, 4 women, and diverse group of people. I think a colleague of mine best explained it. If you walk into, if you look at a New York City subway, anyone who's walking out of it, that's the jury makeup, right? Very diverse group of people.
Nipple
But I
a
will
lot
say
of
during Cassie's
things.
testimony, they were intently listening, and the jury got to see still images from some of these freak-off tapes. The public and the press, we didn't get to see it. They had privacy screens on their screens. They had, later on, they're going to introduce headphones if there are any kind of audio that they have to listen to. But I will say that you could see them intently listening and watching, and you could see them, furrowing their brows, for example. But the most profound moment for me was when Cassie was talking about in 2023. This is 5 years after she left Diddy. She's married. She has 2 kids. But she said that she kept getting these horrible flashbacks, these, from these traumatic events. And she says that she decided that she wanted to walk into traffic, that she could not live anymore. And she's sobbing on the stand, and she wasn't showing much emotion. During her whole testimony, it was very matter of fact, very soft tone, but at this point she is sobbing, talking about wanting to end it all, and that her husband stopped her and helped her get into rehab. And when she's done with her testimony, I look over at one of the jurors, and a female juror looks over to another male juror and mouths, "This is hard," and she starts wiping away tears. And so I do think that Cassie's testimony really touched them. There was a moment, though, these are long days, Dawn. Last week, it was from 9 to 5 every day. It was going a little over 5 o'clock. So you see, after lunch, they're getting a little bit tired, but they're still trying their best. And the judge thanked them for their public service. During Kid Cudi's testimony yesterday, when he was explaining a meeting that he had with Diddy, where he described him as a Marvel supervillain, he said he walked into a room and he was staring out of the window like a Marvel supervillain. The jury chuckled a bit. And so I do think they're very engaged. It is long days, but Cassie's testimony particularly, I think, was very impactful for the jury.
It's so odd. And look, I mean, you can't help but feel for Cassie when you look at that video, right? Regardless of if you're not interested in being with her, or if there whatever happened, you still should not be beating a woman or anybody like that. But I'm wondering, when you mentioned Kid Cudi, he went and unwrapped. He's accused of breaking into his home and then unwrapping.
Yeah, so he didn't, and that was something that the Diddy's defense attorney pointed out, right? He said, did he, smash your furniture or break any glass when you walked into your home completely destroyed? And he said no, but you could tell that someone had been inside. And I think that's what they're trying to get at, is this kind of intimidation that this level of intimidation that Diddy had. And when he was explaining it, it was December 2011. At this point, earlier that year, Diddy had introduced Kid Cudi to Cassie and said, "You guys should make music together." The two fell in love. They got close in the studio and they started dating. Now, to his knowledge, Kid Cudi, he didn't know that she was still seeing Diddy. And it's not even clear yet if she was still seeing Diddy or if they were just so on again, off again that he was just around. But the minute that Diddy found out, it was all hell broke loose. Cassie calls Kid Cudi and says, Diddy has her address, he's on the way. And so they go into a nearby hotel to lay low, and he calls Diddy, and Diddy says, "I'm here, I just want to talk." And so when he goes home, Diddy's nowhere to be found, but he says that, for example, his front door was unlocked. He left it unlocked, but when he went inside, the Christmas presents were open, and his dog that usually roams free around the house was locked in the bathroom. Then, a few weeks later, we have this incident with the Molotov cocktail, where someone, while he was out of town, ripped a hole in his Porsche convertible and dropped a Molotov cocktail inside and set his car on fire. And so while there's nothing, the defense pointed out, linking Diddy to it, he wasn't at the scene of the crime, no witnesses put him...
Okay, forget about Diddy.
My good time?
Kiss mama.
Too much Diddy. He's going to jail for a long time. Yeah. So much. How you doing, Lil C? came on here. I ate my dinner. Just doing a quick pop-up. Haven't did a live in a long time, so look, let me just do a little live and try to get back in the algorithm or whatever.
It's Sunday, May 25, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, our opportunity to dive deeper into subjects of US politics, society, and culture that rarely get enough airtime on the corporate media. Stories that end up as a 10-second soundbite can form the basis of an 80-minute conversation in this safe space. And it's my pleasure to speak each week to some of the great thought leaders and change makers shaping the American experience. Today, we revisit three of our most compelling speakers from this series: Professor Tim Snyder, Congressman Jamie Raskin, and Professor David K. Johnston.
Well, his first election did not surprise me. I dropped everything I was doing because I saw an opening for him to get to the White House, and I warned that he wants to be our dictator. And Donald, who I've known for 36 years, I wrote about him becoming president in 1988, knows nothing. He's appallingly ignorant, and he's a con artist. He's the most masterful con artist I've ever seen, and I've exposed lots of con artists over my long career. His comeback surprised me. And we don't know yet, because it'll take time for political scientists and political professionals to sift through the data, but I suspect the most important factor in his second term, that he won by a very narrow margin, 1.5 percentage points, is the drop in the number of voters. 13 million people, so if you had population growth, 17 million people didn't show up in this election. Well, they did previously. And of course, if people don't show up, it usually means that they feel they have no power, or they're satisfied with what's going on. And given that America, as the Economist magazine in Britain has pointed out, has not just the strongest economy in the world, but is the envy of the world under Joe Biden, this election result is surprising. On the other hand, America is a country now where half of adults read at the level of a fifth grade child. Half. And more than a fifth, around 22%, read at the level of an 8-year-old, a third grader. So people who don't have reading skills, don't have critical thinking skills, can be easily manipulated, and they have been. And there's plenty of surveys showing that, for example, journalism students at Northwestern University put this together. In those counties in America with no newspaper, there are 3,300 counties in America, and hundreds of them now have no newspaper. Trump's margin of victory was in the neighborhood of 80 to more than 90%. People don't consume news, and they just rely on the PR pitches that they're getting. Then you end up with a result like this, which is a very grave danger to our republic. We may not, as a democracy, survive Donald Trump's return.
Just as an aside, how does America remain a superpower if, as you describe, the people in it are increasingly uneducated? How much of the country being a superpower on the world stage relates to the actual the number of people who are part of it? Because again, to me, that just talks to the 1%, or it talks to big business, and talks to the Elon Musks of this country, who are actually holding the controlling stakes.
Well, we live in a very complicated and competitive world. Knowledge is power. Fundamentally, knowledge is power. And, I've been teaching for the last 15 years. I taught law at Syracuse University. I'm not a lawyer, but I was on the faculty teaching law there for 15 years, and now I teach at Rochester Institute of Technology as a professor. And I'm astonished at how students these days do not know things that were basic requirements to get out of junior high and high school when I was in school in the 50s and 60s. It's amazing. There are surveys showing, Americans are asked on whose side did we fight in World War II, and the plurality picked with the Nazis against Russia. Just appalling ignorance about these things. And it's been going on now for quite a long time in America, that we have been dumbing down our education system. We've been withdrawing the arts. We kept football. And many schools no longer require students to read a novel. Reading a novel is critical to understanding what sociologists call the other. It's a way to learn why and how other people behave, what motivates them. But many high schools now, even for honors English, don't require you to read a novel, or maybe one at the most. And I know of schools and of individual teachers who show movies instead. Now, if you and I both read Harper Lee's novel, Atticus Finch in each of our minds is a different person. But if we watch the black and white film, we get a pre-digested Gregory Peck. By the way, there are school districts where I live in Western New York that ban To Kill a Mockingbird because it's filthy.
So maybe we should talk just for a second about Trump's plan to deconstruct the Department of Education. This is a Christian nationalist decision, really, isn't it? This kind of comes from the Heritage Foundation, this idea that actually we can, in their desire to stop indoctrination, they want to indoctrinate in their own way.
Exactly correct, with one little caveat. Donald Trump has repeatedly called Christians fools, idiots, and schmucks, and he means that Yiddish word in the worst possible sense.
Piece of shit.
He's not a Christian. He was asked on a radio show where I live 6 years ago or 8 years ago, when was the last time as a Christian you asked God for forgiveness? Donald goes, what, forgiveness? Why would I do that? I've never done anything in my life requiring asking anyone for forgiveness, which should tell you all you need to know. But then you add in his repeated, written, and stated assertion that his life philosophy is a single word: revenge. Christianity utterly rejects revenge. You cannot call yourself a Christian honestly and believe in revenge. But the plan here, I think, is very, very clear. Attacking science, calling it a religion, asserting it's unverifiable, spreading messages like Dr. Fauci should be tried and put in prison because none of these 70-some virus vaccines in the United States was ever tested for safety and purity, which is pure, utter nonsense. The goal here is a top-down oligarchy run by white supremacists. Make America Great Again is really just cover for Make America White Again. And, over the years that I've covered Donald and known him, I've written many times about racist actions by him when he was a casino owner, as a landlord. His family has been steeped in racism from the get-go. And Donald on the campaign trail, at one point he pointed to a man and said, "That's my black man," as if he's property. So the goal here is very, very clear. It's, in fact, indoctrinate people, take away access to things that would question abuse of power from the top. Don't let students read various books and novels. And from that, you can then remake the country into something unrecognizable as a democracy, but probably able to function just fine on an economic basis. China, after all, does it.
And the rest of the world is looking on in horror. Certainly the nations that are NATO member states, for example, who rely on the United States for their safety and for their security.
Yeah, well,
And they are obviously concerned that maybe under the direction of Vladimir Putin or who only knows who, Donald Trump will probably get to that end game of removing the US from NATO. Certainly that's how it feels. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think that Trump very likely will move to follow through. One of the reasons Trump didn't do a lot of things in his first term is that he is an incompetent manager. As soon as I arrived in Atlantic City in 1988 from the Los Angeles Times, his own executives were ratting him out to me as a complete and utter incompetent, and I very quickly established that, he didn't know anything about his own business. He owned 2 casinos, but he knew nothing about the business. And so Trump has created this faux impression that he's this great business genius. Anybody who understands business, and I had an appointment in a graduate business school for 8 years after I retired from the New York Times, knows that his 2 shows, Celebrity Apprentice and Apprentice, what went on there would just kill any business. That's not how business works. But why would most people know that? They have no idea whatsoever about how business works. And so Donald didn't follow through on many things, partly because there were some people who stood in his way and said, you really don't want to do that, or this or that will happen. But I think he now feels emboldened. The courts have bowed down to him. They are openly talking about deporting American citizens. So I think we're at great risk that Trump will turn out to be an actual dictator. And one of the signs of that would be found in our Fifth Amendment to our Constitution. Most Americans think if the police arrest you, you have a right to contact your lawyer or your family and have a court hearing. That's not true. The Constitution says the privilege of habeas corpus shall not be suspended except in time of war or insurrection. Abraham Lincoln did it. And if Donald can find a way to create some violent response that's big enough, I can see him declaring this is an insurrection, suspending habeas corpus, which would allow him to arrest people he doesn't like and hold them incommunicado. And will the courts support that or not? Well, I don't trust this current Supreme Court majority. I trust lots of the judges Trump appointed to the bench. Many of them have turned out to be good judges. There's some awful ones in there. But many of them have been rooted in the law. But there are a number of things Trump can do that would diminish our democracy. The other big sign that we're going to become a dictatorship is if he starts firing generals and admirals and promoting officers out of turn, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels. That is one of the classic signs of an authoritarian government exercising control.
Well, he said he was going to fire any of the military that were involved in the withdrawal from Afghanistan because it was such a terrible operation in his opinion. So that could be the basis for that.
Well, he's also said that he's going to recall Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If you're a U.S. military officer, you are subject to recall to the age of 70. Milley is in his 60s. Now, to court-martial him, he's going to need generals and admirals to go along with this, and I think he'll have a much tougher time with that, and therefore he may not do it. But understand, Trump doesn't understand anything about the Constitution. He had to have it explained to him when he was president why there is a memorial over the USS Arizona in Pearl Harbor. How you can grow up, not just in America, but where you did in the United Kingdom and not know about December 7, 1941 is astonishing and goes to how Donald is appallingly ignorant. So he has repeatedly said, I have an Article 2, that's the part of the Constitution governing the presidency. I have an Article 2 that says I can do anything I want. It says nothing of the kind, but if that's what Donald thinks, he will behave that way.
And lowering the bar that allows Donald Trump to be president twice. This is, again, feeds his ego and his narcissistic personality disorder that he can win a second term. It kind of lowers the bar for future presidents, doesn't it? Because ignorant people will be like, well, if he can do it, then maybe I could too.
After Trump was elected, been in office about a year, I did a worldwide tour about my books on Donald Trump. And the most interesting thing I heard back from many of the lectures was from a man in Germany who said, well, you know, you Americans have been very lucky. You went 200 years without having an absolutely crazy authoritarian get to the head of your government. To those of us who live in Europe, you just got lucky and now you're catching up with the rest of us. And while it was a terribly cynical comment, I thought, yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. And of course, if you don't explain to people that your liberties depend on the liberties of people you don't like, then you're going to have a very hard time defending the liberties of the people. And Donald has no interest in the liberties of the people. He has said, you shouldn't be allowed to write something about me unless I approve.
And we've started to see that with the ABC News settlement, $15 million, because Trump was described as a rapist when he didn't like that description, despite the adjudicated rapist decision. This is just the beginning of this spiral, really, isn't it? Where the integrity of journalism, which of course he describes as fake news or the enemy of the people, this is going to come to a head in this next regime, isn't it?
Yes, ABC. We don't know exactly why ABC folded in the case they would have won.
Yes.
But ABC has many, many interests, including a television network beyond ABC. It has theme parks that can be subject to all sorts of federal regulatory interference and other interests.
We should remind people that ABC's parent company is Disney, and they also have government contracts, apparently.
Well, actually, Disney owns ABC.
Sorry, other way around.
The parent company is Disney. At one time, it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Yes, they have contracts with the government like Elon Musk and a number of other people. But I expect that Trump will bring civil actions against my former newspaper, the New York Times. They may bring criminal actions. They will do everything they can to harass and harry that newspaper. I also expect it will stand up, but everybody won't. We've seen that the publishers of the Los Angeles Times, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, and the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, killed editorials supporting Kamala Harris. Now, the editorial page belongs to the publisher. In my view, the publisher is entitled to do whatever he wants. You don't like it, that's fine. And when I was an investigative reporter at the LA Times, there were mornings I woke up and there's an editorial in the paper that without naming me says, yeah, we don't think this is what's going on, and would dump on their own story. That's fine. They're entitled to do that.
Yeah.
Both publishers did allow the news departments to report on this robustly, but that doesn't mean that will continue. And the federal government's levers to bring businesses to need is, I think, something Americans don't fully appreciate. Much of my career, I've focused on regulatory law and how regulations you've never heard of take money out of your pocket or deny you things. And that machine can be used not just for good, not just for extracting money from people, that's an abuse of it, but it can also be used for government to punish and suppress corporations that don't bow down to Donald Trump. Voluntary obedience, which is what Disney did in the ABC News case, is one of the worst things you can do. It signals to other people that you're a coward. It signals to the oligarch or the dictator or the wannabe dictator that they have more power than they actually do.
So, on that, David, let's talk about democracy in the US now, because I've been saying for a while that democracy has already fallen, and we've seen a lot of people have certainly said that this election didn't really feel like a proper election because of the disinformation campaign, the amount of money that people like Elon Musk spent on trying to buy votes, $1 million at a time in some cases. And also, going alongside with that, we have this rise of dictatorship, which also many Americans refuse to accept either. So is it American exceptionalism that prevents some people from accepting or acknowledging that democracy has fallen or can fall and that dictatorship can rise here?
Well, democracies all around the world have been in trouble for some time. When I was doing lots of lectures 15 years ago, I would tell the audience that there was this tsunami of authoritarianism building, and I felt like I was putting my hand up to stop it, which is, of course, totally useless, but what else is there to do? But when great social tides come along, they have to play themselves out. After the plague in Europe, the church losing its iron control of the populace, for example, that had to play out. And democracy requires people who are engaged about their government, who feel that they are citizens, not just occupants of an area. And yet, both Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan said in slightly different language, you know, there's no society here. We're 300 million people occupying this territory in the United States. And that has weakened the connections and the bonds that allow people to work out their differences and reach compromise. And then, of course, Newt Gingrich in 1994, when he was House Speaker, popularized this idea that bipartisanship and cooperation is what he called political date rape.
And the tragedy is that we are almost now so polarized that it seems like we've gone beyond the point of no return.
Oh, I don't think that. I mean, after all, America survived a civil war. It survived having a murderous president of the United States in Andrew Jackson, whose portrait, by the way, Trump hung in the Oval Office when he was president.
You're a big fan.
You know, we survived the Great Fear after World War II. This is not at all hopeless. And Trump didn't win by some huge margin. If Trump's economic policies do what I and other people who understand economics expect, which is make economic growth slow down or likely reverse, increase inflation, particularly for food, and start trade wars in which Trump seems not to appreciate that China and Mexico and Canada and others can retaliate against us. That should wake some people up, get some people to go turn out to vote. And so it'll take 2 years to get a new House. We could change the control of the Senate in 2 years, and it's a much better table for the Democrats in 2026 than it was this year. But we also could absolutely fail, and we can end up being a dictatorship. You know, from the fall of Rome took 40 years. We have this misleading sort of belief in the modern world because of news that things happen right away. You know, no, they don't. For weeks before the attack on Fort Sumter that began the Civil War in the United States, there were news accounts saying, you know, when are they going to attack? When are they going to attack? You know, this ship arrived today and these soldiers arrived, and when are they going to attack? These things don't suddenly happen out of nowhere. 9/11 didn't even come out of nowhere if you've been paying attention to Osama bin Laden, but very, very few people do, and most of those were avid readers of the New York Times.
So
about this.
The disconnect in this last election was that the economy was doing better on paper, but not in person. And so Donald Trump kind of seized on that and claimed that he'll bring prices down and he'll bring inflation down. He'll obviously take credit for Joe Biden's economy over the next 2 years because of the approximately 2-year lag on a lot of these policies. So is there going to be a wake-up call? Will there be buyer's remorse? I mean, how do you think that will play out when things do get more expensive and Donald Trump doesn't have control over them?
Well, I've been arguing that a smart strategy here is let Trump be Trump, LTBT, let Trump be Trump, because his policies won't work and they can't work. So let him do that, and people will pay the pain for not understanding and for not understanding how the economy works, how politics works. But it will take several years. I absolutely agree. Anything good will be claimed as the successes of Donald Trump. And people forget that under Joe Biden, the economy literally was much better. From 2022 to 2023, the median income, that's half make more, half make less. It's very typical of what people make as opposed to the average, which can be skewed way up because of people with literally multi-billion-dollar annual incomes, not wealth, incomes. The bottom half's income rose 20% faster than society overall. I do these numbers every year for 30 years. This is a sharp change where the bottom was gaining and the top wasn't. And but it takes years for things like that to play through. You know, the decline of the 90% in America began in 1974 after a peak in 73, but we really didn't see the strong effects of that until more than 30 years had passed. So these things do take time. But Donald's authoritarian impulses in other areas, using the military as he's promised to do against American citizens, deporting American citizens, deporting students who protest on campus, those things probably will come back, hopefully will come back to wake people up to this loss of liberty and this notion that we're going to tell you what you can read, what products you can buy, what medical drugs and other medical interventions will be available to you. That over time shouldn't play particularly well. On the other hand, look, the American people have the right to overthrow their democracy and create a dictatorship. The Constitution has a method for doing it. You just over time change the government and change the rules. Hopefully people just aren't that gullible and dumb, but we don't know.
One day it's cool, the next I'm sweating through my...
Oh, well, that's all for me. Until tomorrow, you all have a lovely, lovely, happy Memorial Day. Thank you. Bye-bye.